Good morning. My name is Tom Goethals. I'm an Associate Justice here in Santa Ana of the Court of Appeal. And we are here this morning, June 16th, 2021, to conduct the Appellate Legacy Project interview of my colleague and good friend of 40 years, Associate Justice Richard Aronson. Good morning, Justice Aronson.
Good morning, Justice Goethals.
I'm looking forward to this. I'd like to swear you in so I could get the truth out of you after all these years, but I guess we will forego that.
I promise to be forthcoming.
All right. This is the story of your life, and therefore we're going to start at the beginning of your life. You were born in 1950 in some unknown hospital in Los Angeles.
True.
Why don't you tell us about your parents and your siblings, and then we'll talk about your early years a little bit.
Okay. My father was from Baltimore. He was an Air Force pilot during the war, World War II.
His name was?
Milt Aronson. And he was an instructor in the Army Air Force during the war and was stationed in Bakersfield and remained in Bakersfield after the war ended. My mother was from Santa Barbara, and she grew up there and went to UCSB, and then went down to SC and got a teaching credential, and then her first job was in Bakersfield, teaching grammar school. And it was there that she met my father, and they were married in 1946.
And your mom's name was?
Lorraine.
Her maiden name?
File.
Okay.
My grandparents, her parents were terrific people. They were, my grandfather was born in Milan in 1896, came out here in 1900 as a small child and grew up here, but had about a fourth grade education. My grandmother, French and Irish descent, was born in Arizona and moved to California, and she had an eighth grade education. But they were just terrific people. They had a reverence for education and insisted that all their children go to college, and they made that possible. And I loved them dearly. They were very close to all of us as we were growing up, and were instrumental in our lives during some very rocky times. In any event, I came along in 1950, and my two sisters came along in 1957 and 1958.
And their names are?
My youngest sister is Marianne. In fact, today is her birthday. And my sister in the middle is Sandra Lee. Sandy is 1 year older. So they were very close, obviously. They were close in age. And I was 7 and 8 when they were both born.
And you are still in close contact with them?
Absolutely. I'm very proud of them. They're terrific.
Where were you raised?
Out in the valley in Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley. Although I didn't move out there until about the 5th grade, so we were in Hollywood until then.
What did your mom and dad do as you were growing up?
My mother was a school teacher, and my father was a stockbroker, and also was involved in real estate. He dabbled in many business enterprises, but primarily he was a stockbroker.
And do you remember where you went to school, grammar school?
I do. I was in a public school until the 3rd grade, and then I don't remember the name of the public school, but I was raised a Catholic, and so I was placed in St. Victor's parochial school in the 4th grade, and I had, and it was staffed by nuns. And I could not figure out the attire that these women were wearing. It looked odd to me.
The old-fashioned habits.
The old-fashioned habits, exactly. So I spent 1 year there, and then when we moved to the valley, I went to St. Cyril's school out in Encino.
And did you have nuns there too?
We had nuns there too, absolutely.
Were
Yeah.
these stereotypical nuns who slapped your knuckles with a ruler or their rosary beads or things like that?
Some were, and some were very kind.
What was a typical day in the life of Rich Aronson when you were 8 or 10 years old? What do you remember?
You know, my whole drive was to get out and play baseball and basketball. My mother, who was a concert pianist, tried to get me to learn the piano. I resisted that. I just didn't.
Did you take lessons ever?
I did take lessons. I hated them, and finally she gave up. But my dad supported me, and of course years later I regret not sticking with it.
Could you play anything?
I don't remember.
Did you have a recital piece?
I never got that far, but I remember when I was in college, my mother told me that I'd regret it. I was in college and I went over to the girls' dorm with a friend of mine, and we were trying to impress some young ladies. And there was a piano in the lounge where you waited for people to come down and greet you. Anyway, when the girls arrived, we were talking, and he goes over to the piano and starts playing. And they were all impressed. And I realized then that, you know, maybe my mother was onto something.
As mothers often are.
Yeah.
What else do you remember? Did you play Little League and all those sorts of things?
Oh, sure. I played Little League baseball. And then I played basketball at Notre Dame High School.
That we were just going to move from St. Cyril's to Notre Dame. You graduated in 8th grade from St. Cyril's and moved on to Notre Dame in Sherman Oaks. You were a Black Knight of Notre Dame.
I was. We were the Knights. It was great. It was an all-boys school, which, you know, is not the case anymore. They went co-ed years ago, but really enjoyed going to Notre Dame. And
in those days, Notre Dame generated some athletes.
They did. I know, and that's right. I didn't play on the varsity basketball team my senior year because a guy named Tim Foley took my spot.
Who ended up playing, I think, shortstop for the New York Mets.
And eventually the Angels. He was the number 2 player selected in the draft that year, and he was also an all-CIF quarterback. Anyway, he wanted to stay in shape, so he decided to go out for basketball. And that pushed me down. I was going to come off the bench and play a little bit. We were really good. We were 8th in the state or something.
You had a forward or a center who ended up playing for the Los Angeles Raiders too, I think, or maybe it was the Oakland Raiders.
Yeah,
then.
John Vella played tackle for the Raiders, went to SC. Anyway, Tim went out to stay in shape. I wasn't going to play. I needed the money, so I didn't play that year. But it was a good experience, and I really enjoyed going to Notre Dame High School, and really enjoyed the fact that we just thumped Loyola that year.
Where I went.
Where you went to school, right?
Indeed. Of course, I'm much younger than you are.
Well, yeah, not much, but.
You remember anything else about Notre Dame? What kind of a student were you?
I was a pretty good student. I mean, I was the kind of student that was interested in what I was interested in. I did well in those subjects, but the stuff that I didn't like.
What did you like?
History.
And what didn't you like?
You know, English, history, sort of the liberal arts stuff. Well, the math stuff was boring to me, you know. But
you're not a science guy, you're a humanities guy.
Well, I ended up, you know, liking science, but I just was really fascinated with history and politics.
So how did you decide where you were going to go off to college?
Well, you know, it's different than it is today. Today, parents are on their kids they take them to counselors, they get resume advice, they get advice on extracurricular activities so you look good to various colleges. I know parents that took their kids to campuses all over the country to see which college their kids would like. My parents were just not involved. They expected me to go to college, but it was up to me to decide. And I was going to continue with my Catholic education. I was going to go to a Catholic university. I made up my mind to do that. And I ran into a friend of mine at halftime at a high school football game, and he's saying, I'm at the University of San Diego, and he talked about the school and liked it a lot. It sounded pretty good to me. It was, I didn't want to go too far away. I wanted to stay close enough to home, but I wanted to get far enough away where I was a little independent. So that sounded perfect. San Diego was within driving distance of home, so I applied there and went there.
Did you ever go down and look at it before you ended up?
I never did. I never did. I took his word for it. The first time I saw it was when I arrived on campus.
It's a beautiful spot, though, up there on the hill, isn't it?
It turned out to be a really beautiful campus, yeah.
One of my sons went there, as you know, and I could never go visit him during college because he lived on the beachfront for 3 years, and I was so bitter I was paying for that I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
You did the same thing.
I did the same thing. I lived at the beach a couple of years, yeah.
Right there on the sand.
It was very nice.
You didn't live out on the beach your freshman year, though, as I recall.
No, lived in the dorms. You had to live in the dorms.
Any experiences in the dorms you'd like to share with us?
Oh, I was lucky to remain in school. So that was the last year. There were two colleges at USD. There was a men's college and a women's college. And they were in the process of uniting, but that was the last year the two colleges were separate. So in the men's dorm, of course, one of the rules was you couldn't have any women over.
People watching this may find that hard to believe, but there were two campuses, a men's college and a women's college on the same campus, and you couldn't cross-pollinate in the dorms. Women were not allowed to come into your dorm rooms.
You did. We all ate together in the cafeteria, but that was it. And the dorms, by the way, were large. We had a living room, 2 large bedrooms in the back, and a kitchen. Anyway, I had a friend over, and we were sitting in the living room talking.
The friend was not a male.
Not a male. It was very innocent. And they had proctors in the dorms to keep an eye on what was going on. And the proctor that weekend happened to do a check and discovered my friend and I talking in the living room. And so that was an offense that could have led to my expulsion. And thankfully, the proctor was understanding and grounded me for the following weekend, but did not report me. It turned out he ended up being my pledge father in the fraternity that I pledged, Alpha Delta Gamma. He's just a good guy. He ended up being the head of the FBI in San Diego. And then later on, I think the head of the DA's investigation unit in San Diego as well.
And so he didn't kick you out of school
he didn't
or
kick me out
recommend
of
that
school.
you get
Think
kicked
how
out
my
of
life
school.
would have been different. Yeah.
Tell us about your fraternity experience, if there's anything to tell.
It was just a typical fraternity. And it was in the 60s, and fraternities were losing their attraction. It was, people were growing their hair longer. It was a movement time. There was the Vietnam War going on. And actually our fraternity sort of fell apart towards the end as well. Some of them, it was a small school. There were only 3 fraternities on campus. But I made a lot of friends. It was, looking back at it, I don't regret that experience. I could have done without Hell Night, which was not a pleasant experience. But
Did the Fu Manchu, the famous Fu Manchu, appear during your undergraduate years at USD?
I did not have, I don't know why you think I had a Fu Manchu. I did not have a Fu Manchu. I had a mustache. But
I've seen photos, and it looked rather Fu Manchu-ish to me.
Did it? Well, all right. But
and did that appear during those years or later?
I can't remember. It's too long ago.
All right. At some point, you decided you were going to go to law school.
I did.
Tell us about that decision.
I always, I took a course, sort of that had a constitutional course, a legal course in undergraduate school. Liked it.
What was your major, by the way, as an undergraduate?
Political science and history.
Okay, go ahead.
And my roommate was going to law school. I had a lot of friends who were going to law school. And if you remember, it was during the Watergate period. There was a big uptick in applications. And I was swept along in that crowd. I wanted to, contribute to the cause of justice. Sounded like something that was worthwhile, and so I applied to law school, went to UST.
So I was going to say, you applied to Harvard and you went to Harvard?
I went to the Harvard of the West.
There we go. So you stayed in San Diego.
I stayed in San Diego, yeah. Actually, it was financially convenient for me to do that for various reasons. One is I could continue living with my roommate, John Murphy, who's a partner in a nice law firm up in the Bay Area right now.
Still a close friend of yours.
Still a close friend, absolutely.
And what did you like or dislike about law school?
I liked the interest in the passion for law and being interested in studying and understanding things was not frowned on. I was in a fraternity, as I mentioned, and there were a lot of jocks in that fraternity. It was the jock fraternity, and if you showed an interest in academics, you were, that wasn't something that was necessarily valued. It wasn't frowned on, but it was. There were other things that were more important, like
drinking beer and chasing girls.
Exactly, like what was going to happen. The horizons didn't extend beyond the next weekend. In law school, it was interesting. There were a lot of interesting things to discuss. Many people in law school were older. Some had served in the armed forces, and it was a more serious environment, and I appreciated it. I like that.
Some people that we know here in Orange County, I think, were in law school with you, right?
A lot of people, yeah.
Some of whom became judges and successful lawyers.
That's right.
And some had military backgrounds, some of those people.
Right.
You have retained some connection to the University of San Diego Law School all these years later.
I have, right. I'm on the board of visitors for the law school.
And they gave you some award.
They did.
What was the award they gave you? I forget.
It was Distinguished Alumni, one of those awards.
One of those pieces of glass you have in your office.
Right, yeah.
And by the time you graduated from law school, did you have a vision for your legal future?
I wanted to be a trial attorney. That was always the goal. My uncle was a trial attorney in Orange County.
We're going to talk about your uncle is a lawyer who has since passed away, but who cut a wide swath through Orange County for about 50 years, named Sill Aronson.
Exactly. He was an excellent trial attorney, and he came to Orange County in the 50s. After graduating from George Washington University Law School, and was in one of the earliest members of the DA's office. I think there were 8 to 10 people in the DA's office at that time. I think there's about 250 now, and so he was one of the legal icons in Orange County.
As a young prosecutor, I met your uncle 40 years ago, and almost every young prosecutor hated your uncle. When I found out that you two were related, I found it hard to believe. Frankly, I didn't believe it for a long time, but now I certainly accept that Sill was your uncle.
Did everyone hate him? I didn't. I know
Sill,
that he could be.
Sill, the word bombastic in the dictionary had Sill's picture next to it, I think.
True, but he was friends with Jim Enright and Eddie Freeman, who were they were in the DA's office together. And,
sure.
And so those were good guys. They liked Sill. Sill liked them.
Later in life, I got a big kick out of Sill.
Yeah,
I grew to like him. Most people did, but he tried to intimidate young prosecutors.
Okay. Yeah.
So would you attribute your interest in becoming a trial lawyer largely to Sill's influence? Partly. I have to tell you, I saw Anatomy of a Murder in
Jimmy Stewart and George C. Scott in that movie. It's a great movie.
Sure.
And the guy that I really liked was the prosecutor from East Lansing, who came down to this little town to try this murder case, and that was George C. Scott. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a prosecutor. Ironically, Ray Icola, my colleague,
here on this court. Yeah.
On this court, grew up in that town, knew many of the people that were in Otto Preminger's movie, and just that's a small world.
That is interesting.
Example.
So you get out of law school and you decided, I'm going to be a trial lawyer. In those days, often that led a young lawyer to apply to a government office. We both did that. And what happened with you?
Well, I applied to the Orange County Public Defender's Office. I know I wanted to be a prosecutor, but I wanted to get into court. And I would have applied to the DA's office in Orange County, but I was told not to bother. My uncle was the defense counsel for one of the members of the Board of Supervisors who were being prosecuted by the second in command in the DA's office.
Those were famous cases back then at the time.
They were big cases back then. In fact, there was a change of venue. The cases were tried in San Diego. And the prosecutor did not get along with my uncle. And he didn't want another Aronson in the office. Years later, we became friends. But anyway. And then I applied to San Bernardino district attorney.
How'd you end up out in San Bernardino?
Well, a friend of mine was who went to law school with me. She was out there and loved it and urged me to apply out there, and I did. And I got I interviewed with the public defender's office here, and then interviewed out there. Got the job offer first out there, and was told I was going to get an offer from the public defender's office. But my uncle told me to take the DA's job, that I would learn more doing that. And he was right.
So you did. You went to San Bernardino and stayed there for 4 or 5 years?
3 years.
And within less than 2 years, you transitioned from trying basic misdemeanors to murder cases.
I did. It was I did. It was an early track. There was opportunity there because for various reasons, and so I was trying murder cases 15 months after I passed the bar, which was
that wouldn't likely happen today.
That would not happen today.
But you were not anchored in San Bernardino really for those 3 years, were you?
Well, no, but I got a friend of mine came out, John Kogis, who came out and lived with me. He got a job there too, and we were roommates. So I could have stayed out there. It was comfortable.
But didn't you come back? You didn't spend your weekends, most weekends in San Bernardino,
John and I drove to San Diego. We had friends in San Diego. We had to get out of San Bernardino. It was smoggy and hot. And we,
And you were cutting a wide swath in your bachelor days through San Diego County.
Well, we had fun.
Okay, so after 3 years of living that sort of split life, spending your weeks in San Bernardino and your weekends in San Diego, you decided it was time for a move.
Yeah, my uncle invited me to come down and join him in practice.
Here in Orange County?
Yeah, my family's down here, so I made the transition.
When you say your family, your mom had moved to Orange County?
No, she hadn't. She was still up in the valley. But my uncle, my cousins were down here, and it was closer to home, and so I decided to come on down.
Left the DA's office and joined Sill Aronson in practice. Aronson and Aronson.
Well, no, it was still one Aronson.
But you came and made appearances for Sill on his cases and began to learn the defense side of the business.
Yeah, I was, and I did some civil work too, a little bit. So I stayed with Sill for about 15 months. But I primarily rode the circuit, continuing his drunk driving cases. My uncle specialized in drunk driving cases. Yeah.
That he did. That's why he knew so many young prosecutors.
Right.
After 15 months, you moved again.
I did. I wanted to get back into court and try cases and get to know people. And I didn't think I was a little bored in private practice with Sill.
So where'd you go?
The public defender's office.
How'd that happen?
Well, I would meet or did meet several people in the public defender's office when I was doing I had some of my own cases, and met Jennifer Keller among some other people, and she urged me to apply. We became friends. Played
She was a
racquetball
young
together.
deputy public defender at the time.
She was.
She's gone on to greater glory as a trial lawyer since, but we'll get probably back to Jennifer again as
Yeah.
we move forward. Okay, so she, among others, encouraged you to apply. You applied, and the Orange County Public Defender offered you a job. Who was a public defender then?
Ron Butler.
Rest his soul. There was a plaque on the front door of the public defender's office before they knocked it down over here across the street. I wonder if they transferred the plaque to the new building. Do you
I
know?
don't know.
Anyway.
He was a good guy.
He was a good
Yeah.
guy, well known and well respected. How long did you work for the public defender?
Let's see. I joined in 1980, and it's about 8 years, I think.
And
Yeah.
and rose through the ranks?
I did. I was eventually. So I had a stint out in North Court in Fullerton, and then came down and went to the felony panel and tried some cases, and then eventually was joined management and was the head of writs and appeals and also the head of the homicide unit.
Which is maybe when you and I met.
I think so.
Perhaps.
Right. I think that's right.
I was a prosecutor and you were a public defender, and we met in an Orange County courtroom. As I recall, one morning I was prosecuting your client for murder.
That's right. We had a preliminary hearing in front of Gene Reinheimer, I think.
Indeed. That was probably early 1980s, early to mid 1980s.
Mid 1980s, I think. Yeah.
And somehow, against all odds, and I don't think it would happen today, but we found out we had a lot in common, and we have become very close friends over the years.
That's right.
We hate to admit that on
That's right.
videotape, don't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
We also, would run together, and
Indeed. Let's talk about that for a minute. You have mentioned your athletic prowess at various stages. You've always sort of fancied yourself a world-class athlete, wouldn't you say?
no, I wouldn't say that.
In any event, by the mid 80s, we were both running on a regular
yeah.
basis. And there was a group, if you worked for the government, I was in the DA's office, you were in the public defender's office, a group of us would run every day at noon just about, right?
Right.
What do you remember about that?
That was fun. There were a lot of people that did that. And it was a good way to, for the defense bar and prosecutors to get to know each other and talk to each other, become friends. It's too bad that it was just a more civil time, I guess. And that fostered developing relationships. And also there were judges that ran. And I got to know Jim Smith, who's became a very good friend, Judge Smith.
He was the presiding judge of the Orange County Superior Court at one point.
Later on, he became the presiding judge, right. But at that point, he was a judge out in West Court.
That's right. That's where I met him, I think.
Yeah. And I got to play, so I played basketball. In fact, I was on the freshman team at USD. And so Jim was a big basketball player. He played at Pacific and invited me to...
Redlands, I think.
Or Redlands, rather,
Right.
not Pacific. And he invited me to come out and play some pickup games with Mike Horan and Gary Polson. And we all became good friends.
Indeed. And other judges were runners. Dave Carter, for example.
Dave Carter, absolutely.
Federal judge sitting across the street from us right now. Has sat over there. Did 20 years in the Superior Court. Now has done 20 years in federal court, I think.
Yeah.
All close friends of ours.
Right.
And we ran in an unusual event for many years.
We did, Baker to Vegas.
Tell us just briefly about that.
Well, you did that before I did. I mean, I didn't start running my leg at Baker to Vegas until the late 90s. And I was on the bench then, I think.
I think you were.
Yeah.
Just tell us what Baker to Vegas was in 25 words or less.
Well, it was a relay race from Baker into Las Vegas.
Baker out in the middle of the California desert, through the mountains, overnight.
Right, which was how many miles?
120 miles.
120 miles, yeah. So they had various legs. You went over hills. It was a tough slog.
Mountains,
Mountains.
snow,
Right.
heat, wind.
Right. We started in the evening, and the run ended up early in the morning in Vegas,
Indeed.
or later. Yeah.
Indeed. Always an event, always
Right.
an adventure. All right. So you've made your way through the public defender's office. You're in management. You're running the homicide unit, which suggests that they thought you were the best trial lawyer in the office. And yet, after 7 or 8 years, you decided to move on once again.
Well, it was just an opportunity that I didn't really seek, but I was grateful for.
Tell us about that.
I got a call one day from someone who worked as a lawyer for Justice Sonnenschein in the Court of Appeal as a research attorney. That person was leaving. He was a former prosecutor. We used to have motions against each other, and asked me if I would be interested in coming over and taking his spot. And I interviewed.
As a senior research attorney here at the Court of Appeal.
Right, and I interviewed with Justice Sonnenschein, and I took a leave of absence. You could do that in those days, and I came over and was a lead staff attorney for her for about 1.5 years.
How do you think that impacted your legal career?
Well, it made a huge difference. I got exposed to the appellate side of things. I enjoyed that quite a bit, and I enjoyed being a neutral. As an advocate, sometimes you're trying to stick a square peg in a round hole. It doesn't. Some of the arguments are not. You feel. It's tough.
You're a vigorous advocate.
Yeah, you want to be a strong advocate, but in terms of your comfort level, my comfort level, I felt better about just looking to try to get the right result.
So that was the first time you ever sort of assumed the role of a neutral, and it sounds like you liked it.
I did, and then when an opening came up for a spot as a commissioner, they were looking for a commissioner in Superior Court. I decided to apply.
What year was that?
1989.
Before we leave that senior attorney position, there were some iconic justices here at that time. Any of those have any influence on you?
Well, Orange County didn't have an appellate court for years, and until I think 1988. And the first 4 justices there were Justice Sonnenschein, Justice Tom Crosby, Justice Ed Wallen, and Justice Jack Trotter. Those were the original members in the Court of Appeal.
Our illustrious
Division
forebears.
3. That's right.
And any of them have any particular impact on you?
Well, they all did. Although Trotter to less extent, because Justice Trotter left after about 1.5 years. But Justice Crosby was he was a real interesting guy, very intelligent, terrific writer, had a passion for the law, and would not. Was always skeptical of the conventional view, always questioning things, and it was really enjoyable to.
Still an icon here, wouldn't you say?
Still an icon, right? He was very influential on a number of people, including Jennifer. She worked for Ed Wallen, and Justice Wallen was a terrific person, a nice and a terrific guy.
So 1.5 years here, the Superior Court beckons with a commissioner job. You take it.
I did. I was lucky to get it.
What did you think you were going to do as a commissioner initially?
I didn't know I was willing to do anything they wanted me to do, and
What did they have you do initially?
I was assigned to be the discovery commissioner. So they had a law and motion department then, It was Justice Rylersdam, Judge Rylersdam then, was the head of it. He was later my colleague in the court. Judge Bauer, Ron Bauer was there, and Judge Eileen Moore was there, who is also up here and is my colleague. And then I joined them. And so they did the summary judgments, they did the demurs, they did all the law in motion in the court except for discovery. I did all the discovery motions, probably because they didn't want to do them.
But interesting, because you didn't have a lot of civil background at that
I hadn't
point.
thought about, the last time I thought about civil law was when I took the bar. Because I was just a criminal lawyer.
So how'd you take on that new responsibility?
Well, it was they threw me into the pool. I just managed.
And you didn't drown.
They had research attorneys that would help you, but yeah, it was quite an education.
How long did you do the discovery work?
About a year and a half. I
And
think.
then what'd you do?
Then I became. Then I was assigned to try criminal cases.
You were the first, as I recall, full-time commissioner who got a full-time felony trial slot.
Up to that point, the commissioners did law and motion matters, or they didn't do jury trials. So I was the first commissioner to get that opportunity.
So how'd you get them to give you that job?
I don't know. Jack Ryan was the presiding judge in the criminal department, and we got to talk about some legal issues. I got to know Jack because he had some pretty serious criminal cases when he was a judge on the criminal panel. And we reviewed them. When I was a research attorney in the Court of Appeal, he knew I worked for Sheila Sonnenschein. And so we got to talk about those cases and the issues that came up. There were some issues about determinate sentencing, and I think he thought that I could do the job.
It was an interesting assignment because, as your viewers will understand, lawyers don't have to go to commissioners. They have to stipulate. And on a criminal case, that means both the prosecution and the defense has to agree to stipulate to a commissioner. And they did that with you.
They did.
You had a full-time, active trial department. Why do you think that happened? How'd you get them all to stipulate to you?
I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know.
It worked.
It worked.
And so how long did you stay in that slot?
I stayed there, let's see, that was, I think, 91 to 1996, I think. 96 or 97.
Let's back up and talk about a sensitive area that I think we need to talk about. And you and I talked about this in advance. Let's talk a little about your personal life. At some point, you met a lovely young woman and married her.
I did.
And who was that?
Linda was her name.
How did you and Linda meet?
When I was in Orange County, invited, I was going to go to a party one night. I'm single in Orange County, living with a friend of mine. And I mentioned John Kojas. He was my roommate in San Bernardino, and he was my law school roommate. And he stayed in the DA's office. And I invited John down to go to this party with me. And he brought two of his friends. They were two court reporters. One was the woman who he was seeing at the time and ended up marrying later on. And her friend was Linda. And they came down, and we were introduced. We were in our apartment, my apartment. And I remember her sitting across the room. Somebody said something amusing, and she turned and smiled at me. And I still have that picture firmly embedded in my mind.
And so you knew there was something special there?
I thought I was attracted to her.
What year would that have been, more or less?
That was 1988, I think. 1988 or not? 1988.
Okay. then, so you pursued Linda, and eventually you convinced her somehow against all odds to marry you.
I did.
And when did you get married?
We got married in, I'm sorry, I'm blanking. We got married in 1980, not 1988.
I was going to say, you were way late. I was going to come back in. 88
I know.
is way too late.
So that's right, I was in the public defender's office. And so this was 1980. We got married in 1981. And she came down, and that summer, the summer before we got married, she came down and worked for Judge Perez. She was a court reporter, and
that's where I met Linda, as you know. I was
right.
assigned to Judge Perez, James Perez, as his deputy DA, and so Linda and I also met and knew each other, and she was a terrific human being. I didn't know that you had your eyes on her at that point. I was already married to my lovely wife, but Linda and I were friends as well.
Yeah.
So when did you get married?
1981.
Okay. Thereafter, you had a couple of beautiful children.
We did.
Tell us about them.
I had a little girl in July of 82 and a little boy born in June of 84.
Amy and Richie.
Amy and Richie.
Okay. We need to get to where the story turns. At some point, the story did turn in your personal life. Why don't you just tell us about that?
After Richie was born, Amy was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, and so which was a terminal disease. It still is, unfortunately. And so, you know, it was a blow to us, obviously. And it was strange because her cheeks were rosy and she was had a glow about her. So for those people that don't know what cystic fibrosis is, it's a genetic defect that results in an overproduction of the mucous membranes throughout your body. So the mucus compromises the function of the pancreas. It collects in your lungs and is fertile ground for infections. And so you can give antibiotics to clear that up, but after a while, then the body, the bacteria develop a tolerance to the antibiotics. Scar tissue forms in the lungs, and eventually these children, and then it was children, end up dying. So that's what happens. The treatments are better now, and they manage to get to young adulthood, or some even into the 30s and 40s.
But you lost Amy.
I lost Amy.
How old was Amy?
She was 8. That happened. And before Amy passed away, Linda was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. We thought we got it early, so that was 1988. And she, so it was aggressive treatment, it was surgery, there was chemotherapy, and she went through some bone marrow transplants, and it looked like, you know, it was going to be okay. I'm sorry, the bone marrow transplants happened later. Anyway, she got a clean bill of health for a while. And then Amy continued to struggle. Amy died in 1990, and then the stress on that, I think, led to the cancer resurfacing for Linda, and she passed away the following year, in 1991.
And that's part of your life story, so I told you I thought we ought to talk about that. I appreciate you doing that. But it also had something to do with your professional decisions that you were making at the time.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I always thought about, you know, joining a big firm or going out into private practice again, but that was I couldn't do that because we had to keep the insurance. I had to keep government insurance. I was also lucky to get a judicial position, the commissioner spot, because it was due in large part because of Linda. So there was an interview.
Why do you reach that conclusion that Linda helped you get that job as a commissioner?
Well, there was an interview process they reviewed the applications and they interviewed a few people they were considering. And there were 5 people in the committee, and Jim Smith was one of them. So I knew he would vote for me because he had urged me to apply. And there was another candidate, a good friend of mine, who was a family law lawyer. And I knew two people would be voting for her, and I think there was one other person on the panel that was going to vote for me. So it was going to come down to one judge in North Court who was on the interviewing committee, and during the interview he didn't seem that interested in my responses, and until I mentioned that I was married to Linda, and he brightened up because he knew his courtroom was next door to Jim Perez, the judge that Linda worked for, and she used to go over there and fill in for his court reporter, Judge Ross's court reporter, and I'm convinced that that's the reason that I heard later that he voted for me. I was selected by a 3-2 vote.
And it wasn't on your merit; it was on
Linda's. It wasn't anything I did.
Merit.
Right.
Okay. And so you lost Linda and you lost Amy, but Richie was still
right.
The light of your light.
My boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how old was Richie?
Richie was in 1990, 91. He was 7. This was a tremendous blow for him.
And you. And so you stayed in the commissioner's job during that time.
I did.
And it made sense both professionally and personally for you.
I did. I just concentrated on Richie and working.
Indeed. And then, so you chugged along. Well, let me just jump to something else I want to make sure I talk about. You have been a very fortunate human being in your life, despite the terrible losses that you just described, because you found your early love in Linda and Amy and Richie, and then you lost Linda and you lost Amy, and yet you just recently celebrated, I think, a wedding anniversary, didn't you?
My 26th wedding anniversary, right.
And somebody has resurrected your life to a large degree, your beautiful wife, Sherry.
Right.
Tell us about Sherry.
Yeah, I met Sherry in 1993, 92, no, late 1992. And
how'd you two meet?
A friend of mine, she worked at Home Fed in San Diego, and a good friend of mine introduced us. It was a blind date. And
was there immediate electricity, at least on your part?
Yeah, I can't speak for Sherry. I don't think that was the case for Sherry, but I was certainly interested. She was just so vivacious and energetic,
and still is.
And still is. And
tell us a little about Sherry.
She made me laugh again. She was she was interested in sports, and I'm also interested in sports, and so our first night out, we went out with my friend and his wife. She's from Oklahoma State, so she's a big football fan. She was telling us about her rivalries, and Oklahoma was the big rivalry for Oklahoma State, but also Nebraska was. And she was telling me that Nebraska had this sort of course they were a powerhouse football team then, but they were also they considered themselves a strong academic institution. In fact, the N, people don't really know this, she was explaining to me, but the N on the Nebraska helmet stood for knowledge.
And she got a big kick out of that, didn't she?
I thought that was, that was pretty funny. I like that.
Sherry is still a huge Oklahoma State Cowboy fan, football fan.
The Princeton of the Prairie is how she describes her alma mater.
And during football season, on Saturdays when the Cowboys are playing, it's hard to get Sherry Aronson's attention still.
She dragged me to, she was the president of the Oklahoma State Alumni Association here in Orange County. And she dragged me along to many of those get-togethers where they would meet at a restaurant and watch the game.
The football viewing parties.
Right.
Indeed. Anything else you want to say about Sherry as we move along? Or I'm sure we'll probably come back to her.
Yeah. She's, you know, what can I say? I mean, she's my partner.
So, you're a commissioner in the early 1990s. You have these professional experiences and these tragic personal experiences. At some point in the mid-90s, you weren't a commissioner anymore. What happened?
I applied to the bench and was Governor Wilson appointed me in 1996.
Why did you decide to move from being a commissioner to a judge?
Well, that seemed like the next step. It would open me up to other assignments. It just seemed the logical thing to do.
And you were encouraged by people like Jim Smith, probably?
Jim encouraged me to apply, as did some other people. Yeah.
All right. What did you do once you got appointed as a Superior Court judge?
Well, I continued on my assignment, trying criminal cases, and then went over to the civil panel.
Why'd you do that? Change from criminal, where you had spent your whole career, and suddenly you decided to go become a civil trial judge?
I wanted exposure to different areas of the law. I thought I would enjoy that.
How'd you find it?
I liked it. It was, again, baptism by fire. There was, the whole civil panel is driven by law and motion, and it was, I had to come up to speed pretty quickly. But the research attorneys over there in the Superior Court were good, and I had help from other bench officers, and enjoyed it a lot.
And you did that for about 5 years, and then you applied for a new job.
I did. There was an opening in the Court of Appeal. So
who had retired at that point? Whose place did you take?
God, I'm trying to think. Who did leave? Tom Crosby was retiring, and who else left? Justice Scoville left. Justice Moore left.
Not Eileen Moore. Henry Moore.
Henry Moore. So there were some new positions. So the court originally was 4 judicial positions, and the legislature expanded it to 7. So I either took Tom's spot, or I think I took a new position. And I think that Justice O'Leary may have taken Tom's seat.
Okay. Anything about the application process that you want to talk about, or that you recall specifically, stands out in your mind? Who appointed you?
Governor Wilson appointed me.
No, Governor Wilson appointed you to the Superior Court.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Gray Davis?
Gray Davis appointed me.
Who appointed me to the Superior Court.
Yes.
That's why I remember.
Right.
So you got appointed by a Republican governor to the Superior Court and a Democratic governor to the Court of Appeal.
I did.
A little bit unusual. Probably doesn't happen often in recent years. How'd that happen? Do you have any idea about that? What were you? What was your political registration?
I was registered as a Republican then. And so
Did you change your registration to get appointed by a Democrat?
No, I was a Republican when I was appointed to the Court of Appeal.
Okay.
But I think Governor Davis and his judicial appointment secretary, Bert Pines, wanted to change, to their credit, the idea that only Republican governors appoint Republican judges and the converse for when there's a Democratic governor. So they were interested in appointing people that they thought were good, regardless of their political affiliation. So
And somehow you convinced them that was you?
somehow I snuck through.
And so what year did you get elevated to the Court of Appeal?
2001.
And you've been here ever since, and it's 2021. So 20 years here, not in this building, because this building's only, 10 years old?
Right.
And so you sat, the court was actually split when you first got appointed, as I recall.
Not initially. We were all on Spurgeon Street, but then when Justice Fibel got appointed, we ran out of space. And so they rented space in another building, and Justice Fibel and I went over there.
You were in the annex.
The annex, right?
But it was, it was blocks away. It wasn't right next door.
That's right.
What's the advantage of being in the annex versus everybody being in the building versus what's the advantage of having all the justices together in the same building?
Well, I don't think there was an advantage in being in the annex. It's much better when everyone's in the same building.
What's the benefit? I mean, we haven't had this benefit for the last year because of COVID, but what's the benefit for us all being here together?
Well, the benefit is the interaction that we have, how we can go down and talk about issues and cases and develop a bond about those things, iron out our disagreements.
That suggests that this is a collaborative effort here.
That's right. That's how I view it.
Why?
Well, because I think the court should speak with one voice when it can. It's that's important for people to accept and follow our judgments.
What's the difference in your mind, having served in both for lengthy periods of time, between being a Superior Court judge and being an Associate Justice of the Court of Appeal?
The difference? Well, we have a little bit more time to make decisions. Not as much
time, maybe, as some people think.
Not as much time as Superior Court judges think we have, but we do have more time than the judges over there. They're under the gun quite a bit. So that's a big difference.
There's one thing, we talked about your education earlier, but there's one other thing I want to make sure we talk about. Once you got elevated to the Court of Appeal, you pursued some additional formal education.
Right. I applied to the University of Virginia. They had a master's in law program for appellate judges.
Doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist anymore, but it was an outstanding program. Tom Crosby went through it, and he urged me to apply. And so I was accepted. It was a 3-year program. You spent the summer, 2 summers, attending classes, and then you wrote a thesis.
So did you take a leave of absence? What'd you do?
Pardon me?
Did you take a leave of absence?
No, you continued.
How'd you do the?
You did both. You worked remotely, I guess. That's how we did it. It was more difficult then, but we communicated by phone, by computer. So
how long did you go to Virginia for in those 2 summers? How long were you physically there?
8 to 9 weeks each summer.
At UVA?
At UVA. We had final exams, and then the final year we wrote a thesis.
What was your thesis?
It was on the 8th Amendment.
Cruel and unusual punishment?
Right, 3 strikes, and the 8th Amendment issues surrounding 3 strikes legislation.
How long did that program last? I mean, in terms of duration, how long did they have the program, not how long did you go?
Well, it had been in existence for a while, and it lasted a few more years after that. But when there was a budget crunch later on, and that got axed, the program was in large part dependent on federal grants.
There's a rumor that I've heard, I've never verified this, that someone said your thesis was the finest thesis that they had ever seen in the history of the program.
Well, one of the instructors told me that. That's
So it's just a
mentioned
wild
that.
rumor.
That's what they say to everybody, you know. So
Now, you're being modest, I'm sure, but so how long was the thesis?
it was a little over 100 pages.
And what happened to it? I've never read it. Is it sitting in this building somewhere? Is it on your
It's
computer?
in a file.
Where is
You
it?
know, I did think about submitting it to law reviews, but I just never got around to doing it. I was just too busy.
Do you view yourself as a writer, a thinker, a reader? What are you? Are you a particularly skilled writer if you wrote the finest thesis in the history of the program?
You know, I don't. You know, this is too much. I do not think I'm a fine writer. In my view, a fine writer is someone like Justice Bedsworth.
You work at it, though. You work hard
at it. But I don't consider myself a writer. I'm just a judge that tries to get to the right result. You know, that's I don't have any other notions greater than that.
There's a story I think you heard for the first time when you were at the University of Virginia about a Baltimore Orioles manager. You know what story I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, well that's right. So one of the classes was this legal theory class, and there was an article by Stanley Fish, a law professor, and I still remember it because it sounded right to me. The story goes like this, that a baseball writer saw Dennis Martinez, who was a Baltimore Oriole pitcher, talking to Earl Weaver before a playoff game. And they were in seclusion and having this very serious conversation. And the writer thought, I'm going to find out what that conversation's about, because Weaver's a genius and he's probably imparting this terrific theory on how to win the game and how to pitch. And so he approached Martinez after the conversation was over and said, what did Weaver tell you? And Martinez said, he told me to throw strikes. And the writer said, he told you to throw strikes. Did he say anything else? He said, yeah. He said to keep them off the bases. Was there anything else? No, that was it. So this befuddled the writer. It couldn't be. It was obviously, that's something that Martinez knows. You throw strikes, keep them off the bases. Why does he need to be told that? The point of this, the article Fish points out, is that there is no theory of pitching. You just pitch. You do the best you can. And so the theory comes later, afterwards. And it's much like judging. You don't develop a theory of judging and then go judge, at least for trial judges. Trial judges just try to get the right result. They try to do what's fair, follow the law, and reach a result that so they can look at themselves in the mirror. And the academics have the idea that judges are should have some sort of overriding philosophy that they use to decide cases isn't accurate. Judges are not law professors. They're lawyers trying to do the best they can.
And is that your experience as well? Do you agree with that observation?
I think that's true for trial lawyers. I think it becomes less so as you go for appellate judges. You do develop certain theories on how to approach certain problems. Statutory interpretation, for instance, you have to really come to grips with how you're going to handle those issues as an appellate court, or as an appellate justice, rather. I can give you an example, for instance.
All right.
So say there's an ordinance that says a person cannot drive a vehicle into the park. And so the issue is, does that ordinance apply to an ambulance that drives into the park to take someone who's injured to the hospital. Justice Scalia, for instance, would say that it does, that that's a violation of the ordinance. To change vehicle, to make an exception for an ambulance, would be to change the meaning of vehicle. And that would be to change the ordinance, and a judge can't do that. A different theory, a different approach would be those that judges that look at the purpose behind the law, that look at language, that language has meaning only in context. Dictionary definitions are devoid of context, and so the meanings of words changed depending on the background understanding of the parties, the usage, and in a certain context. And so in looking at the purpose of the statute in context, purposivist, that's what they're called, would come to a different conclusion than Scalia and find that the statute would not apply to the person driving that ambulance. So it's the same thing as a sign saying "keep off the grass." Does that mean the gardener can't cut the grass? So you soon have to come to grips with issues like that as an appellate justice, and certainly as a Supreme Court justice.
Do you have a judicial philosophy, and if so, do you think it has evolved during your time on the bench, either in this building or in this job or on the Superior Court?
I don't think I have an overriding judicial philosophy. I have a certain approach to interpreting statutes and interpreting the Constitution, I suppose. But it's flexible depending on, again, the context of how these problems arise.
Does the sign outside that says "keep off the grass" mean our gardeners should not mow our lawn?
Not in my view. I think the gardener can mow the lawn.
What do you wish you had known that you've learned in the last 20 years? What do you wish you had known when you got this job? Anything?
Well, you can't, I think all of us that have been here for a while accumulate we learn quite a bit. We gain an understanding of the law, a better understanding of the law. We gain some wisdom about justice, I think. And so if I could do anything, of course, I would take what I know now and insert it into Justice Aronson when he started this job. That would have been nice.
Maybe that's impossible, though, because it is something that you develop as you sit in the job.
Right.
You use the word wisdom. It seems a little vain for us to talk about justices having wisdom, but... experience. I'm not... You hope that you gain some wisdom, right? Otherwise... you're not really, and how does wisdom come about? A lot of times it comes through the mistakes you make. Did you ever have a chance to sit on the Supreme Court on assignment?
I sat on a few cases, yeah.
Ballpark number?
3.
Any recollections, anything stand out in your memory about those?
None of them were close cases. The issues were not, well, I take that back. The last case I was on ended up being a unanimous decision, but it was close at the outset. So someone looking at that case would think that the issue wasn't close, but all the justices worked through to get to the result. We all kind of settled on we kept examining the issues and re-examining the issues, and we settled on a solution.
In a perfect world, would you have liked to have sat on the Supreme Court?
Sure. Sure, who wouldn't? But this is really a great job. I'm quite satisfied here.
Any takeaways from your 3 cases on the Supreme Court? Did you learn anything?
Just gained a tremendous amount of respect for the justices on the court and the lawyers that help the justices up there.
You probably, some of those cases were pre-COVID, so you actually went up and sat on the bench in the San Francisco courtroom?
I did.
What was that like?
It was intimidating. It was first time I'd been in the Supreme Court.
Who was the chief on the first case you sat on?
Ron George.
And that was a good experience dealing with Chief Justice George?
It was a great experience.
Good. All right. Something else you and I have talked about, I don't know what you might want to say about this, but you have a high regard for the process, and you feel that process is important. Due process, I guess, but the process is important. What do you want to say about that, if anything?
Just that our adherence to proper procedures is fundamental. We don't have a justice system without doing that.
Some people, in sort of a speculative way, worry about what a judge does when he or she faces this situation. The law seems to require this, but your personal beliefs, your conscience, however you want to describe it, might suggest or require something else. Have you ever had that experience?
A couple of times, thankfully not that often, but a few times, yeah. Especially
how do you resolve that conflict?
Well, on the appellate court, you can write a concurrence. You must follow the law as you see it. If you think the law is unjust or is unwise, you can write in a concurrence and urge the legislature to re-examine the issue. And that happens occasionally. A lot of justices have done that. I've signed an opinion and joined an opinion that urged the legislature to re-examine a law. If you're on the Supreme Court, you're able to change that. So that, but as an intermediate appellate court, we're bound by precedent, Supreme Court precedent. The trial court, though, where it surfaces maybe is in the area of sentencing. That's difficult when there's a determinate sentence. But again, you can. That's difficult. You have a decision to make. So and again, it depends on the issues that are raised by the lawyers. But if if you feel a sentence is draconian and unfair, you can voice your objection again for the appellate court and let the appellate court know how you feel about it. I know that some determinate law sentencing can be harsh, and the federal sentencing guidelines were harsh at times, and I think they've since been revised. But several judges resigned, federal judges and some state judges. So that's an option as well.
We don't generate, it seems to me, a lot of dissents in this court, but you probably have written, while I've been here, as many dissents as anybody, or as contrarian as anybody. What role do you think that a dissent plays in our process?
Yeah, I think, again, we don't have armies to enforce our judgment, so it's important that the parties feel that their arguments were heard. And sometimes if I feel the majority opinion was didn't do that got off track in the analysis or misapplied or misunderstood the arguments raised by the losing party, and I agree with that party, then I think it's my obligation to say so. So the party feels that the losing party feels that at least one justice understood the arguments and agreed with them. And even if the majority did understand and rejected their arguments, the losing party's arguments, one justice agreed with that party, and And if I'm writing a dissent, I probably feel pretty strongly about it. I didn't want to write dissents on trivial matters. And so we all know that a dissent would usually flag the attention of the Supreme Court. And so that would give the losing party an incentive to petition for review, petition the Supreme Court to look at our opinion.
That also relates to what we talked about a minute ago concerning process. It seems to me that because we don't have armies to enforce our judgments and whatnot, we want to make sure that the parties, or we try to make sure that the parties understand that we have looked at and conscientiously considered their positions, and we sort of talk our way through it in the opinions that we write. That's the process, to generate respect for what we're doing here, and or at least not agreement necessarily, but some understanding of why we went the way we went.
Right, so they see the exchange of ideas, that the legal principles that were advocated by the appellant and the respondent were discussed, that we saw the implications of their positions. That is crucial to an effective justice system.
You are only days away from turning out the lights and taking your well-deserved rest. What are you going to miss?
The friendships here, seeing everyone. Miss talking with the other justices, with the lawyers, with Rhonda, my assistant, judicial assistant, and I'll miss oral argument. Really enjoyed oral argument. This court has a reputation as being a hot court, I think. That's how it's...
I've heard that description.
Yeah.
We ask a lot of questions.
We ask a lot of questions. That's one thing the pandemic really, it's a shame. I miss that. It's just not the same doing it remotely.
Right, we did it by telephone only for a couple of months. Now we've been on WebEx or Blue Jeans, and it's better, but
it's just not the same.
It's not the same. There's no question about it. You can't engage the other side, see what they really think.
Right. So I'll miss all that, and I enjoyed the law, figuring out legal issues and tackling legal problems. I'll miss all of that. But at some point, you move on, right?
You're old.
I'm old.
You're old.
I'm old. I'm 71. It's a big number.
We talked about a lot of things that we would touch on during this conversation. We've been going almost an hour and a half. Is there anything that comes to mind that I didn't give you a chance to talk about or you didn't bring up?
These open-ended questions, Justice Goethals, you're a veteran trial attorney. You need to ask more specific questions. I can't think of anything. One
other thing I thought about that we did talk about, I was going to ask you is, what do you think trial judges misapprehend about what we're doing over here in this building? They're only 200 yards away across the plaza. What do all those judges over there not understand about what we do here?
I think we mentioned this before, that they think we have a lot of time. So that's the main thing I can think of. Did you have something else in mind?
No, I just was wondering if there's anything else. The candy does what I always say is the candy keeps coming down the conveyor belt, to use the Ethel and Lucy analogy. It never stops, although the pace is a little slower perhaps than over in the Superior Court.
Yeah, we have a lot of cases, and I think the judges know this, but maybe the people don't realize that we are very dependent on the research attorneys who do a great job, but we are dependent on them quite a bit. We just have too many cases. We can't sit down and tackle every case. Some of these cases are, especially jumbo cases, are so fact-driven, fact-intensive. We need help from the lawyers, and we have some really good lawyers here that make the process enjoyable and produce better outcomes.
Is there anything that...
Can we take a break?
We're almost done. I just have a couple more questions I wanted to ask you. It's kind of an obvious question, but are there any cases as you reflect back on your career, especially in the appellate court, but the trial court as well, that stand out in your memory?
Well, I had a lot of serious cases in the trial court that stand out. One in particular was a double murder in a coin shop with two-defendant case. That was a very interesting and, of course, serious case, obviously.
One of my former law partners was the defense attorney
Was
in
the
that
defense
case,
lawyer.
now a Superior Court judge.
And another friend was the prosecutor. And I tried that case. There was a Brady violation. A habeas petition was filed on behalf of the defendants.
Who had been convicted and sent to
who had
prison.
been convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. And the habeas came in front of me. The DA conceded the merits of the habeas, and the issue was whether it was going to be dismissed altogether or whether there was going to be a retrial. It was a very interesting habeas proceeding. So that one stands out there as on the trial court because it was so involved. On the appellate court, you know, I had a lot of, over 20 years, you run into a lot of issues that end up being published. And
I just wrote a deal for an introduction to the book that we give retiring justices. It's a bound volume that contains all your published opinions, and you have published while you were here somewhere between 180 and 200 opinions. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's I don't know how, it just shows I've been here a long time.
Any of those cases stand out in your memory?
You know, a lot of them do, but it's getting late. One in particular, though, is a 14-year-old boy was given a life without possibility of parole sentence for committing the crime of kidnapping for ransom. So it was a non-homicide, non-injury case. And he was 14, and he got life without the possibility of parole. We wrote a decision reversing that, finding that to be a violation of the 8th Amendment and a violation of the California Constitution. It's cruel and unusual punishment. The reason it stands out is because we anticipated the holding a year later in Graham versus Florida, where the U.S. Supreme Court found a violation of the Constitution, the 8th Amendment. And on that case, it went back for resentencing. And the judge gave that defendant, that young man, then he was a young man, 5 consecutive life sentences. And a life sentence means that you have parole, an opportunity for parole. So he would have been eligible for parole if he lived to be about 150.
Right, so you went from life without possibility of parole to 5 consecutive life sentences.
So the trial court's view was that, well, that's not a life without possibility of parole sentence, and that's what was unconstitutional. So this is a determinate sentence. And we issued another published opinion saying that that was a distinction without a difference. We found that to be the equivalent of a life sentence, and found that to be unconstitutional as well. Ironically, there was an appellate court, another appellate court decision that justified that held that that was not a violation, that is, a life sentence with the possibility of parole, even if it would exceed the expected life, the life expectancy of the defendant, that was not unconstitutional. The California Supreme Court sided with us, and that one stands out. And one of the reasons I remember that case as well is the attorney arguing it was Brian Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy, which was made into a movie. And he was quite an effective lawyer.
Another reason you remember that case, if I might add, is because you knew the trial judge and you had an encounter with him after the fact, which sometimes we appellate justices do have. and it was not a particularly positive encounter.
Well, right. I was in the locker room where judges and lawyers mingled. This was after the case was filed and was over. And he told me that, he called me Father Flanagan and said that not every boy is a good boy.
So it does also stand out for that reason.
It was hard to forget, yeah.
I couldn't let this conversation, which is what I really consider this to have been, end without asking you about people who have influenced you in your life and also your legal mentors. Let's talk about influences first, and I'm guessing you might want to talk about your mom a little more. We talked about her during the first 5 minutes, and we haven't circled back.
Yeah, my mom was just a remarkable person.
I don't know if you told us her name, but oh yeah, you told
Lorraine.
us. Lorraine
Aronson.
Okay.
She was just such a generous soul, a large heart. She got that from her mother, my maternal grandmother, who was the kind of person. Well, during the war, for instance, in Santa Barbara, there were a lot of Navy personnel in Santa Barbara. And my grandmother would invite all of them over for, these were just kids that were lonesome, they were homesick.
This is World War II?
This is during World War II, and they would, my maternal grandmother would invite them into her place for dinner and feed them, and my mother was like her. My mother just found the good in everyone, and strong as a rock. My dad was, in my high school, as I started high school, my dad got very sick and was sick the rest of his life.
And he passed away at a relatively young age.
57.
To us, that seems pretty young today.
Yes. And he had supranuclear orbital palsy, which is a neurological disease that was debilitating and very hard. My mother had to care for him. She was raising my two sisters. I was in college. We had no money. We lived on my mother's salary as a teacher. Somehow, we managed to get through this. And it was because she was so courageous and an inspiration to my sisters and me. And so, and taking care of my dad. I just don't know how she did that. And she managed to do it. It was you couldn't have a better example as a parent, not just as a parent, just as an adult, a person who took everything, every bump and blow that life can give you, and you muddled through. And look at my sisters are terrific. My youngest sister is a president of Guild Mortgage down in San Diego. My other sister owns her own real estate company. They're just terrific people, and it's all because of my mother. So she was the most influential person in my life.
How about legal mentors?
Plenty
other than me, of course.
Other than you, right. There are plenty of those. Jim Smith is one. Jim was just had such an open mind, a humility, and so generous. And so even keel. Just a remarkable person, really very influential in my life. His sense of humor comes to mind with Jim. And anybody that meets Jim is Jim's friend. Dave Carter, who is it's kind of a different judicial personality.
Even though those two are very close friends.
They're very close friends, but very different on the bench. Dave takes charge. He's how do you describe Dave? I would say he's a Marine with the heart of a social worker. He is in charge, works beyond the pale, brutal hours, yet tackles every issue with gusto. He's quite an inspiring figure. And he's now dealing with the homeless issue in Orange County, Los Angeles. Those two come to mind. Tom Crosby also was a legal mentor, and his scholarship, his love of the word, the written word, and the law, those were inspiring as well.
What are your plans for the future?
I'm probably going to do some private judging. See how that pans out. I'm going to do nothing for a couple of months.
Maybe travel with your beautiful wife a little if we ever can get on an airplane again?
Maybe. We look forward to that. We look forward to doing something with the Goethals. That would be nice. And
you have a big new dog that is the light of your life these days.
We have a very rescue dog, a very temperamental husky who's got some mental issues we've got to try to work through. She's in counseling right now. And I plan on seeing my son and hope that, I'm just looking forward to maybe
some grandchildren someday.
Hopefully. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything we missed, Justice Aronson?
I don't think so. I think that we more than covered it, probably way too much.
Well, then I want to say, turn out the lights. The party's over.
Okay.
We miss you already. You've been a great colleague, an inspiration, and a legal mentor to me since I've been here for the last few years, and I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Tom.
Thank you for your friendship.
Thank you.